If you've seen the previous video, you probably know what's happening here. We've been trying to walk from Connaught Place all the way till India Gate. Wow, they're certainly not in the mood to walk this morning. So we've reached the Copernicus Marg, and right alongside Copernicus Marg, this area that you're looking at, this is what we've been calling mini Kerala. This, of course, is a different piece of land, as you can see, and it has its own enchanting history. So, as you may have noticed, it was a little difficult to figure out where that property that belongs to government of Kerala ended and where the Faridkot house began. Oh wow, do you notice something? So there are two beautiful peacocks sitting on one of those trees further back. I'm not sure if you can see them though. But yeah, Faridkot house and that property that belongs to the Kerala government, they're right next to each other here on Copernicus Marg. And the Faridkot house belonged to the ruler of Faridkot, which was a princely state in the area where Punjab sits today. But of course, if you look at this today, you cannot really figure out where was the house. What some research does tell me though is that the Faridkot house was valued at $150 million. It's been a rainy, damp kind of morning today, and here we have a more than $150 million property just sitting unnoticed by the Copernicus Marg. But why exactly are we on Copernicus Marg on this beautiful rainy Delhi morning? Well, we are here because we are trying to reach the India Gate, and of course, if you've seen the previous video, we'd started from Connaught Place. We've now reached the hexagon of the India Gate, and what you're looking at in the background is the Baroda house. And what's interesting to note is, of course, that Baroda house is right next to Faridkot house. Again, both of these were two princely states before India's independence. And the reason you see so many of these houses within Delhi is because when the Britishers moved the British Indian capital to New Delhi, they also allotted land to a lot of the princely states of India close to the Viceroy house, which is the Rashtrapati Bhavan today. And therefore, in Lutyens, you would see so many of these houses. So the Baroda house though is now converted into headquarters of the Indian Railways, as you can see right there, and almost all the houses now are owned by the government and therefore they serve different purposes. So we are still by the Baroda house. In fact, if you would go around this area, the India Gate hexagon and the Lutyens area, you would find so many of these houses that once belonged to the princely states of India. Of course, there's Baroda house, there's the Faridkot house, there's Hyderabad house, Mandi house, Patiala house. If you're from Delhi, you would know all of these places, but you would probably not know what was the history behind these places. So now we are really close to our destination, which is the India Gate. But as I had mentioned earlier, it's definitely about the journey and not just the destination. And I think I've really enjoyed the journey so far. It was a rainy morning earlier today, as I was mentioning a while back in this video. So the rain was actually quite intense early in this morning, and I was not sure if I would even be able to come here and do this walk. But I'm so glad that the rain gave way to this nice, somewhat cloudy weather, and I've been able to come here and explore not just the India Gate but also the areas just before the India Gate. And wow, look at that. That's such a beautiful view. So yeah, I really felt that I would want to capture as much of the walk to India Gate as India Gate, and I hope I've sort of tried to do that a little bit. That is the relatively recently installed statue of Subhash Chandra Bose, who was a very famous freedom fighter of India. He was fighting against the British, but he sort of had a different stance and perspective, so he had allied with the Japanese in order to fight against the British, and we have a statue here remembering him. Some of you might recall this place always being empty, because that's how this canopy was before, I think, a few years ago when this statue was installed. And before that canopy was empty, it actually originally housed a statue of King George, who was the king of Britain, and because India was a colony, a statue of King George was installed right there, but in the 1960s it was removed. From World War II onto World War I. So what you're looking at is, of course, the very famous India Gate, and this was built to commemorate the lives of those soldiers who died while fighting for the British in the World War I. So that would be around 1914 to 1919. That's when the World War I happened. To the dead of the Indian armies who fell and are honored in France and Flanders, Mesopotamia and Persia, East Africa, Gallipoli, and elsewhere in the Near and the Far East, and in sacred memory also of those whose names are here recorded and who fell in India on the northwest frontier and during the Third Afghan War. I did not just make that up. That's what's written at the very top of the India Gate. And of course you see the word India, and on the left hand side of it you see 1914 written in Roman numerals, and on the right you see 1919 again in Romans, because that's the duration between which all these people died. Do you see it? I'm not sure if it's visible on the camera, but right here on the walls of the India Gate we can see the real names of those people who died while fighting for the British. And there's something very mysterious and something very moving, I would say, to read these names of people who are not here anymore, but they fought for a cause, but probably a cause that they were not very sure about, because at least if we talk about nations and the modern concept of boundaries, they were fighting for a country that they did not really belong to when they were fighting for the British. Though of course when we mention countries, it becomes a very interesting subject. Wow, that's a beautiful view. So of course, as you can read right there, the foundation stone of this building was laid by the man after whom the Connaught Place is named. The Duke of Connaught. Look at all those names, all those people who died fighting. This of course is the side-on view of the India Gate, and looks like that's the gate through which you could literally enter inside the India Gate. Wow. This is almost a perspective of the India Gate that we never really get to see. At least I don't consciously remember seeing this, because we've always thought of India Gate as this almost two-dimensional thing. We would just look at it from the front or the back, not realizing that it has this beautiful perspective as well. Wow, look at that thing in the middle. I think I read somewhere it represented the British Empire. And of course this monument was created when New Delhi was being built, right? So I think it got completed by around the 1930s, which is also the rough timeline when our favorite Connaught Place was built as well. Wow, I never thought I'll be able to have that perspective of the India Gate, looking through these little holes. And wow, there's an army man sitting here as well. What would that be for? Wow, an army personnel sitting inside the India Gate. Maybe this is like a ceremonial thing or something like that. Havaldar Ghulam Muhammad, Gunner Sadhu Singh, driver also Ghulam Muhammad, Jamadar Ali Hussain, Lance Nayak Saida Khan, Savar Bal Singh, follower Sukha, driver Fakir Muhammad. Wow, it's fascinating to read these names. And we've got some more names here, because of course that's what this monument was all about, right? This was about writing the names of thousands of soldiers who died fighting in the World War I for the British. Of course, this doesn't have all the names. It has around 13,000 names, but if we take a total count, I think more than 80,000 people of what was then called the British Indian Army died while fighting in those wars. This is another perspective of the India Gate. Of course, the perspective that we are all used to seeing, just that this is from the other side. So you see Subhash Chandra Bose under that canopy where the king once stood, the British King George V. Of course, you can see the same thing at the top from here. There's India and the same coat. And you can see marks of the overnight rain as well. Now I'm walking a little bit around India Gate and looking at all the people, probably the visitors who are also here, and they're also enjoying India Gate. They might have a different perspective. For them, this is hanging out at a popular tourist spot and having some nice family time, which is also a good perspective. This has been such a beautiful morning. Honestly, I almost chose to not come out this morning because of the rain. But I'm so glad I did, and that I was able to reach all the way to the India Gate. So this angle is just so weird. As I was mentioning earlier, we never really look at the India Gate from this angle, so it looks so strange. In fact, it almost looks like an elephant from the backside. That's another nice view of the early morning here at the India Gate. People just relaxing and going around, exercising as well. Just love this. I think one thing that I've noticed is that slowing down and really zooming into things, it helps me experience and explore these places so much more. And we are pretty much done with this morning. From Connaught Place to India Gate and back. Of course, this is the Kasturba Gandhi Marg, and we are looking at what used to be the Curzon Lane. I'll catch you again. Bye.